"Look at the big boy sweating like a hog," Tyler Reynolds sneered as Samuel Baker entered the county meeting hall. The room fell silent except for muffled laughter. Betty ate his way through whatever affirmative action program handed him our good Georgia farmland. Tyler deliberately knocked into Samuel's shoulder, spilling his carefully prepared water conservation presentation across the floor. As Samuel bent to gather his papers, someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "When did they start letting gorillas farm around here?" The agricultural board members, all white, all connected to families who'd owned land for generations, watched with amused expressions as Samuel silently collected his documents. The charts showing his innovative irrigation system that used 60% less water than neighboring farms were now stained with coffee someone had accidentally spilled. Outside, through the windows, 3 pickup trucks with Confederate flags circled his parked truck. On his windshield, someone had already placed a crude drawing of a black man hanging from a tree with the words, "Foreclosure coming," scrawled underneath. The early morning sun cast long shadows across heritage fields, the 80-acre organic farm Samuel had purchased 3 years ago from a bankrupt white family. At 45, his body carried both the weight of good eating and the muscular foundation built during 12 years as a Navy SEAL. Most days, he moved with surprising grace for his size. Today, rage made his movements stiff as he studied the official-looking document that had no legal basis. The letterhead belonged to the County Agricultural Board, but Samuel recognized the handiwork of Tyler Reynolds, the county commissioner's son and owner of the adjacent 300-acre conventional farm. The notice claimed that water testing had revealed dangerous contaminants originating from heritage fields, a lie Samuel could disprove with his meticulous daily water quality logs. Samuel had anticipated resistance when he purchased the farm, but the systematic campaign to drive him out had intensified over the past 6 months. As the only black landowner in the county, he'd faced everything from inflated equipment repair costs to mysterious inspection failures that never seemed to affect white farmers. What bothered Reynolds and his cronies most wasn't Samuel's race, though that was certainly part of it. It was that his farm was thriving while theirs struggled through the worst drought in decades. Heritage Fields remains unaffected by current water restrictions pursuant to Agricultural Code 15B. Samuel read aloud from the exemption he'd legally obtained after demonstrating his water conservation system. The county had been forced to approve it after state environmental officials had praised his methods. That approval had made him a target. Samuel placed the fraudulent foreclosure notice in a folder labeled Reynolds Harassment, Legal Evidence. The file had grown thick. He glanced at his phone. 3 missed calls from Greenleaf Organics, his biggest restaurant client in Atlanta. Scrolling through his messages, he saw why. Someone had posted contamination warning signs along his property line overnight, visible from the main road. Outside, the trucks completed another circle, Confederate flags flapping in the breeze. Samuel recognized the drivers, Tyler Reynolds and 2 cousins who worked for the county road department. They'd been growing bolder, no longer bothering to hide their intimidation tactics. Samuel's seasonal workers were gathered by the equipment shed, looking uneasy. Javier, his farm manager for 2 years, approached with concern etched on his face. "Mr. Baker, those signs. The delivery truck from Atlanta turned around, said their boss can't risk it." "Tell everyone to keep working," Samuel said, his voice calm despite the anger building inside. "I'll handle this." "With respect, sir," Javier lowered his voice. 3 people didn't show up today. They got calls yesterday warning them about working for a black man causing trouble. Samuel nodded, unsurprised but disappointed. "Anyone who stays gets a 10% raise, effective immediately. Anyone who leaves can come back any time, no questions asked." As Javier returned to the workers, Samuel entered his modest farmhouse and locked the door. In his bedroom, he moved aside a bookshelf revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. Inside wasn't just the deed to his property, but something few people knew existed: his service record, partially redacted, and a secure phone that hadn't been used in years. Samuel had left that life behind. had promised himself he would never again use those skills. For 12 years, he'd served as part of an elite SEAL team that specialized in training foreign special forces, a unit so classified that most military personnel didn't know it existed. His call sign, Midnight, had been whispered with respect in places where American troops officially never operated. He stared at the phone for a long moment before closing the safe without touching it. There were legal channels to pursue first. He was a farmer now, not an operator. The situation wasn't life-threatening. Not yet. Through the window, Samuel watched as a truck from Greenleaf Organics approached his gate, then stopped. The driver took photos of the contamination warnings before turning around. That delivery represented $3,000, money needed for the next payroll. As the truck disappeared down the road, one of his seasonal workers quietly gathered his things and walked toward the highway. Samuel picked up his regular phone and dialed the county sheriff's office. After being placed on hold twice, a board deputy informed him that removing potential public health warnings would require an official inspection, which could be scheduled in about 2 weeks. Will Samuel lose everything he's worked for before he can even fight back? Samuel woke at 4 a.m. to silence. The familiar hum of the irrigation pumps was missing. He dressed quickly and walked to the control shed where the county water main connected to his property. The pressure gauge read 0. He checked the account app on his phone. His quarterly water payment had been processed 3 days earlier. By sunrise, he'd confirmed what he already suspected. The main valve where county water reached his property line had been shut off. A county utility truck was parked a quarter-mile down the road, 2 workers leaning against it casually. They straightened as Samuel approached. "System maintenance," the older worker said, not meeting Samuel's eyes. "Computer says there's a leak on this line." "There's no leak on my property," Samuel replied evenly. "I check every connection daily." "Not what the computer says." The man shrugged. "Could be 2-3 weeks before the inspection team can verify." 3 weeks without water during growing season will destroy my crops." The younger worker at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "You could file an emergency appeal with the utility board." "Which meets monthly," Samuel finished, "and the next meeting is in 3 weeks." Back at his farm, Samuel studied the rainfall collection system he'd installed as a supplement to county water. The tanks held enough for perhaps 5 days of minimal irrigation if he was careful. He'd need to prioritize. The heirloom tomatoes that fetched premium prices could be saved, but the lettuce would likely be lost. Samuel made precise notes in a small black notebook, using grid coordinates familiar to anyone with military training. Each notation corresponded to a point on his property where water had been diverted, or where he suspected tampering might occur next. The pattern was becoming clear. A systematic attempt to stress his farm to failure without leaving obvious evidence of deliberate sabotage. As he worked, a convoy of pickup trucks drove slowly past his property. Tyler Reynolds was in the lead vehicle, making a show of drinking from a large water bottle before tossing it onto Samuel's driveway. The others followed suit, a dozen empty plastic bottles littering the entrance to Heritage Fields. That afternoon, Samuel's bank called. The operating loan he'd secured for seasonal expenses was under review. The bank manager, a man who'd approved the loan just 3 months earlier, explained that new risk assessment protocols required additional collateral. "Your property value has been reassessed," the manager said, his voice carefully neutral. "County assessor filed new paperwork yesterday." "My property value hasn't decreased," Samuel replied. "If anything, my improvements have increased it. According to county records, there are potential environmental concerns that affect valuation. I'm sure it's just paperwork, but until it's cleared up." As Samuel hung up, dust from the increasingly dry soil coated his throat. Without the irrigation system at full capacity, the rich black earth was already showing cracks. He'd survived harsher conditions, but the timing was deliberate, attacking his water supply just as the summer heat intensified. Will Samuel's farm survive long enough for him to expose the corruption? By week's end, the situation had worsened. Samuel arrived at the local farmer's market to find his regular booth assigned to someone else. The market manager, a woman who'd previously been friendly, avoided eye contact as she explained that safety concerns had prompted a reorganization. "What safety concerns?" Samuel asked. "We've received complaints about potential contamination from your farm," she replied, glancing nervously at a group of local farmers watching from across the parking lot. Tyler Reynolds stood among them, arms crossed and smirking. "My produce meets all organic certification standards," Samuel said. "I have the documentation right here." "I'm sorry, Mr. Baker. The board's decision is final." That evening, Samuel discovered his delivery truck vandalized. Sugar in the gas tank, racial slurs spray-painted across the sides, and all 4 tires slashed. The repair estimate came to nearly $5,000, money he no longer had easy access to with his credit line frozen. His workers had dwindled to just Javier and 2 others brave enough to defy the growing pressure. Samuel doubled their pay from his personal savings, knowing it wasn't sustainable, but unwilling to lose the people who'd stood by him. The only neighbor who hadn't turned against him was Ms. Wilkins, an elderly white woman whose small property adjoined his on the eastern boundary. In her 70s and fiercely independent, she'd lived alone since her husband's death a decade earlier. That morning, she arrived with several gallons of drinking water and a basket of homemade bread. "They're trying the same tricks they used on the Martinez family 5 years back," she said, sitting at Samuel's kitchen table. "Run the Mexicans out," they said, though the Martinez family had been American citizens for 3 generations. "What happened to them?" Samuel asked. "They sold for pennies on the dollar after their crops failed. Reynolds bought the land through a shell company." She poured herself more coffee. "Next day, miraculously, their water came back on." Later that week, Samuel witnessed Tyler Reynolds confronting Ms. Wilkins at the grocery store, looming over her as she selected produce. "Here your property taxes are coming up for reassessment, Ms. Wilkins," Reynolds said loudly enough for others to hear. "Shame if they found all those code violations on that old house of yours, Ms." Wilkins straightened her spine, looking up at the much taller man without flinching. "My family's been here since before yours learned to spell Reynolds. You threaten me again, and you'll find out what real Southern grit looks like." As Reynolds stalked away, Samuel caught Ms. Wilkins's eye from across the store. She gave him a slight nod, a small gesture of solidarity that meant more than she could know. That evening, Samuel found 3 dead rabbits placed along his property line, their necks broken. The ringing in Samuel's ears became a constant companion as he entered the local diner, and conversations abruptly halted. Eyes followed him as he took a seat at the counter, whispers resuming as soon as he ordered. The waitress, who'd been friendly just months ago, placed his coffee down without a word and moved away quickly. The anonymous calls began that night. Heavy breathing, racial slurs, detailed threats about what would happen if he didn't get out while you still can. Samuel recorded each one methodically, adding them to his growing evidence file. When he reported them to the sheriff's office, the deputy took minimal notes and suggested that Samuel might be overreacting to pranks. "Look, no offense," the deputy said, leaning back in his chair, "but you people tend to be a bit sensitive about these things." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "By you people, I assume you mean farmers concerned about criminal harassment?" The deputy's face reddened. "You know what I mean. Look, Baker, I'll file the report, but I'm telling you, this county has a way of things. Always has. Might be better for everyone if you just moved on." Samuel leaned forward slightly. "Sheriff, with all due respect, I've moved enough times in my life. I'm home now." The nocturnal visits escalated the following week. Trucks would circle his property after midnight, headlights sweeping across his fields, occasionally firing shots into the air. Samuel installed security cameras with satellite uplink that couldn't be jammed by local equipment. The footage showed masked men in Reynolds' distinctive blue pickup, though their faces were carefully concealed. One morning, Samuel found a dead calf at his property entrance, its throat cut. The message was unmistakable. That same day, he received notice that the county was filing an eminent domain claim on his most fertile 15 acres for a community development project, a move that would make his farm financially unviable. The local newspaper ran a front-page story suggesting Heritage Fields used dangerous chemical compounds in its farming practices. A bizarre claim about an organic farm that meticulously avoided synthetic inputs. The reporter hadn't bothered to contact Samuel for comment. When Samuel visited the county records office to research the eminent domain claim, a clerk accidentally provided him a file containing backdated documents showing plans for a highway through his property, plans that had been created the week after he purchased the land, not recently as claimed. With no local lawyer willing to take his case, Samuel drove to the neighboring county to meet with an attorney who had successfully fought similar cases. The man listened carefully, his pen tapping nervously as Samuel laid out the evidence of coordinated harassment. "These people," the lawyer said finally, organizing the documents into a folder, "they don't play by rules, you understand." Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Neither do I." That evening, as Samuel returned to his farm, he found Tyler Reynolds and 5 men waiting at his property line. They blocked the driveway, forcing him to stop. Reynolds approached Samuel's window. "Heard you went looking for a lawyer," Reynolds said, the smell of alcohol on his breath. "Waste of money. Smart man would understand when he's not wanted." "I'm wanted just fine by my customers," Samuel replied calmly. "My produce sells out weekly." "Not anymore, it doesn't," Reynolds smiled. "Funny how restaurants get health concerns when they hear rumors. Very cautious industry." The men behind Reynolds shifted, hands near their waistbands, suggesting concealed weapons. Reynolds leaned closer. "Accidents happen to outsiders who don't listen, especially out here where it takes emergency services so long to respond." The metallic taste of anger filled Samuel's mouth as he restrained himself from responding physically. His training had taught him to neutralize threats efficiently, knowledge that could end this confrontation in seconds, but that would only justify their prejudice and give them legal means to destroy him. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Reynolds?" Samuel asked quietly. "Just sharing some local wisdom," Reynolds replied. "This land belongs to people who understand it. Always has, always will." As the men finally moved aside to let him pass, Samuel felt something shift inside him. The restraint he'd shown was wearing thin. That night, he checked a hidden safe containing several passports and credentials under different names, remnants of his former life he'd promised never to use again. Samuel sat alone in his farmhouse. Spread across his kitchen table were photographs of his former SEAL unit, faces partially obscured in many of the images due to the classified nature of their operations. 12 years of his life devoted to missions most Americans would never know about, training elite forces in countries officially unacknowledged as allies. His fingers traced the faces of men who had trusted him with their lives. Rivera, the communications specialist who could make radios work in conditions that defied physics. Williams, whose financial intelligence gathering had uncovered terrorist funding networks across 3 continents. Chen, whose surveillance operations had saved countless lives by identifying threats before they materialized. Samuel had left that life behind voluntarily, seeking peace in the rhythms of agriculture and the simple satisfaction of growing food. He had promised himself never to use his specialized skills against civilians, regardless of provocation. That line represented everything that separated him from the forces he had once fought against. "What would crossing that line make me?" he whispered to the empty room. His phone buzzed. A text from Javier announcing his resignation. The 3rd employee to quit this week. Samuel couldn't blame them. The pressure was becoming dangerous, and these were people with families to consider. Samuel pulled out the agricultural grant applications he had submitted over the past 2 years, all denied despite meeting every qualification. The most recent rejection letter contained a handwritten note at the bottom. "Applicant unsuitable for community integration requirements." The weight of his old military dog tags felt heavy in his palm as he removed them from a drawer. He'd kept them as a reminder of what he'd survived, what he was capable of when pushed. The cool metal against his skin brought back muscle memories of discipline, focus, and lethal efficiency. They see a fat black farmer, he told himself. They have no idea what I've done, what I'm capable of. His phone rang, a secure line he hadn't used in years. The caller ID showed only a single word. Command. Baker, he answered. Been following your situation, said a familiar voice, his former commanding officer. Local news isn't covering it, but satellite imagery shows your property under surveillance. Not amateur stuff either. I'm handling it, Samuel replied. Like a civilian, his former commander said. That's admirable, also ineffective against organized corruption. I gave my word. No more operations on American soil. This isn't an operation. It's self-defense. A pause. You were never just a weapon, Midnight. You were always a protector. Remember what we trained for, to defend those who can't defend themselves from systemic abuse. After the call ended, Samuel sat in silence for a long time. Then, he made a decision. The intelligence gathering began methodically. Using satellite imagery purchased through anonymous cryptocurrency transactions, Samuel documented the illegal water diversion system that Reynolds had constructed to redirect county resources to his property. The evidence was clear. Pipes that didn't appear on any official maps channeling water from the main county line directly to Reynolds Reservoir. Samuel tracked financial connections between agricultural board members and the Reynolds family. Bank records revealed suspicious patterns, board members purchasing new vehicles or making home improvements shortly after voting on measures that benefited Reynolds' interests. The county commissioner had received consulting fees from development companies interested in land that mysteriously became available through foreclosure or eminent domain. A pattern emerged spanning 20 years. Black and immigrant farmers systematically forced out through tactics nearly identical to what Samuel now faced. Water access restricted, loans recalled, property reassessed, followed by harassment and vandalism. Every case ended the same way. Land sold well below market value, usually to shell companies that traced back to the Reynolds family or the commissioner. Samuel found evidence that the county commissioner received regular kickbacks from developers planning a commercial project that required specific parcels, including Samuel's farm, to be viable. The same commissioner who would vote on the eminent domain claim against Heritage Fields. The familiar smell of gun oil filled the air as Samuel cleaned and checked his old equipment. From a footlocker bearing government markings, he removed surveillance devices far more sophisticated than the security cameras protecting his property. These were designed to be undetectable, capable of transmitting encrypted data through networks that wouldn't register on standard scanning equipment. This is just information gathering, he told himself, not an operation. But as he created a detailed wall map marking properties, relationships, and pressure points, Samuel recognized the familiar patterns of mission planning. He was approaching the situation as he'd been trained, identifying vulnerabilities, establishing intelligence networks, and developing contingency strategies. The wall map expanded to include financial connections, meeting schedules, and potential leverage points. Samuel added red pins to mark properties previously taken through suspicious means, creating a visual history of the corruption. Blue pins identified potential allies, people who had lost land or been harmed by the same network. Yellow markers highlighted vulnerabilities in the Reynolds operation. Overextended credit lines, water quality violations that had been covered up, tax discrepancies. 3 days later, Samuel made 3 calls to untraceable numbers. Within 48 hours, unmarked vehicles arrived separately at night, parking in his barn away from surveillance. Rivera, Williams, and Chen, civilians now, but carrying the same focused demeanor that had made them elite operators. Just like Kandahar, huh, Midnight? Rivera said, setting up communications equipment that could intercept calls throughout the county without detection. Samuel shook his head. No. This time we're fighting for something that's actually ours. As the team established a command center in his barn, Samuel felt both concern and relief. These were men who understood operations against entrenched opposition, who knew how to dismantle corrupt networks using their own weaknesses against them. But this was also a line crossed, from passive defense to active countermeasures. The surveillance operation began with precise objectives: document illegal activities, identify key vulnerabilities, and establish a legitimate case that even corrupt local officials couldn't dismiss. Samuel's team deployed with the silent efficiency that had once made them feared in hostile territories overseas. Rivera established a communications network that intercepted calls between Reynolds and his allies, revealing explicit discussions of their campaign against Samuel. "The N thinks he's protected by some organic certification," Reynolds had laughed during one call with the county commissioner. "Wait until the health department finds bacteria in his soil samples next week." Williams followed the money, documenting offshore accounts where development kickbacks were laundered before returning as agricultural investments in Reynolds' farm. The county water budget showed unexplained infrastructure losses of 23%, precisely the amount being diverted to Reynolds' property through illegal connections. Chen's surveillance captured video of Reynolds meeting with agricultural board members behind closed doors, passing envelopes that later appeared in personal accounts as consulting fees. Audio recordings caught the commissioner promising developers that Samuel's land will be available soon, one way or another. The slight mechanical whir of hidden cameras became an ambient sound throughout the county as the team established a comprehensive surveillance network. More damning than any single piece of evidence was the pattern they revealed: a systematic operation that had been perfected over decades. Samuel approached Miss Wilkins with his findings, and she revealed historical documents she'd been quietly collecting for years. Her late husband had been the county clerk before the current administration, and he'd kept unofficial records of land transfers that showed a disturbing pattern. Properties owned by minorities or outsiders had been systematically targeted whenever they occupied land desired by the Reynolds family or their allies. Harold knew what was happening but couldn't prove intent, Ms. Wilkins explained, showing Samuel faded maps with properties circled in red. Every time there was some legal justification: tax issues, water rights, zoning changes, always by the book on paper, but we knew. Samuel studied county emergency response protocols and schedules, noting that sheriff patrols near his property were deliberately timed to be absent during the late-night harassment. The pattern suggested official complicity rather than coincidence. After 3 weeks of intelligence gathering, Samuel was ready to implement the first phase of his counter-strategy. He attended the monthly town meeting, sitting quietly in the back as Reynolds presented plans for a new agricultural processing center that would bring jobs to the community. The proposed location included 15 acres of Samuel's farm, the same land targeted by the eminent domain claim. When the public comment period began, Samuel approached the microphone. The room fell silent, many people visibly uncomfortable as he stood before them. "I have just 2 questions about the water usage for this proposed facility," Samuel said calmly. "First, will it require more or less than the 27 million gallons illegally diverted to Reynolds' farm last quarter?" Reynolds started to object, but Samuel continued, his voice steady. "And second, how will the facility address the agricultural runoff currently flowing from Reynolds' farm into Wilkins Creek in violation of EPA regulations under Clean Water Act, Section 404? Samuel presented satellite imagery showing the illegal water diversion, along with water quality reports from independent laboratories documenting contamination from Reynolds' excessive pesticide use. The evidence was projected onto the meeting room wall for all to see. "I just have one more question," Samuel said as the sheriff moved to shut down the presentation. "Why is the county paying for water that's being diverted to private property registered to offshore companies in the Cayman Islands?" The collective intake of breath from the audience was audible as Samuel revealed financial records showing the connection between Reynolds' farm and shell companies used to hide assets. Reynolds' face flushed with anger as whispers spread through the crowd. The sheriff ended the meeting abruptly, but the damage was done. Local residents, many of whom had faced their own water restrictions, began asking questions about the discrepancies Samuel had highlighted. In the parking lot afterward, Reynolds confronted Samuel, backing him against his truck with several men flanking him. "You have no idea what you've started," Reynolds hissed. "This isn't just about a farm anymore. You're dead. Do you understand me? Dead." Samuel's expression remained calm as he looked Reynolds directly in the eyes. "I've been hunted by better men than you." The confrontation was captured by news cameras that had been anonymously tipped off about potential violence at the town meeting. Reynolds's threats and racial slurs appeared on local news that evening, triggering wider media interest in the underlying water dispute. Will Samuel's public stand make him a bigger target, or begin to turn the tide? The team initiated a coordinated pressure campaign against key conspirators. Anonymous tips to the Internal Revenue Service highlighted board members' undeclared income from consulting work. Evidence of misappropriated agricultural subsidies was sent to the State Oversight Board, triggering an automatic audit. Mysteriously, Reynolds' illegal water pumps malfunctioned simultaneously, cutting off his diverted supply. Electronic controllers short-circuited in ways that appeared to be natural equipment failure rather than sabotage. Reynolds' farm suddenly faced the same water shortage he had engineered for others. The county clerk arrived at work to find herself locked out of the system containing land records. The official explanation was a security protocol triggered by potential unauthorized access, a protocol implemented remotely by Rivera after documenting her role in backdating official documents. When Reynolds confronted Samuel at the local store, desperation had replaced his usual arrogance. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice strained after a week of watching his operation unravel. "Farming," Samuel replied calmly, selecting produce. "Just farming. Something wrong with your water supply?" Anonymous videos appeared online showing Reynolds threatening local farmers who had refused to sell their land. The footage came from security cameras installed years earlier, evidence that had been suppressed by local authorities but was now reaching state officials who couldn't ignore such explicit documentation. Samuel offered employment to farmers who had lost land through similar tactics, regardless of race. His water conservation system was shared openly with neighboring properties, creating an alliance of small farmers united by their recognition of the corrupt system that had kept them divided. Reynolds's phone constantly pinged with alert messages as his schemes unraveled, bank notices about compliance reviews of suspicious transactions, agricultural inspectors responding to anonymous reports of pesticide violations, media inquiries about water usage disparities documented in county records. Samuel quietly purchased radio airtime on the local station, not for accusations but for educational programming about sustainable farming practices. Each segment highlighted a technique that conserved resources while increasing yield, practical information that contrasted sharply with Reynolds's wasteful methods that prioritized short-term profit over long-term sustainability. The breaking point came when Reynolds and 6 armed men arrived at Samuel's farm after midnight, determined to end this once and for all. They found the farmhouse dark, but as they spread out across the property, Samuel's voice came through hidden speakers. "Gentlemen, you've entered private property with firearms and intent to do harm. Every word and movement is being recorded and transmitted to state authorities. You have 30 seconds to depart." Reynolds fired shots at the speakers, shattering one but triggering the full surveillance protocol. Floodlights activated around the property, illuminating the intruders for high-definition cameras. Reynolds ordered his men to find Samuel and finish him, spreading out across the darkened farm. Samuel's team implemented non-lethal countermeasures designed to disorient rather than injure. Disorientation devices emitted frequencies that caused confusion and mild nausea. Misdirection techniques used sound projectors to create phantom movements in the darkness. One by one, the intruders found themselves separated, disoriented, and ultimately zip-tied to fence posts by operators they never clearly saw. Reynolds alone made it to the barn, where he found Samuel waiting calmly in the center of the open space. "What the hell is happening?" Reynolds demanded, pulling a handgun from his waistband. "What are you?" "I told you," Samuel said quietly. "I'm a farmer." Reynolds raised his weapon, but before he could aim, Samuel executed a lightning-fast seal hand-to-hand maneuver, that disarmed him with such speed and precision that Reynolds couldn't process what had happened. One moment the gun was in his hand, the next it was across the room and he was on his knees, arm locked behind him in a restraint hold that caused no injury but allowed no movement. "What the hell are you?" Reynolds gasped, fear replacing rage in his voice. "Just a farmer who learned how to survive predators," Samuel replied. State police arrived 20 minutes later, having received an anonymous video feed of the entire attack. The red and blue lights washed over Reynolds' face as he was placed in a police car, his protests about being set up undermined by the comprehensive video evidence of him organizing and leading an armed assault. Reynolds' arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and corruption triggered a cascade of legal consequences that extended far beyond Samuel's farm. Despite the county commissioner's attempts to intervene, state authorities had taken jurisdiction based on evidence of systematic corruption affecting multiple jurisdictions. Samuel presented state investigators with a comprehensive evidence dossier documenting years of coordinated harassment, illegal water diversion, financial fraud, and civil rights violations. The file included notarized witness statements, satellite imagery, financial records, and surveillance footage that formed an undeniable pattern of targeted discrimination. "This is military-grade intelligence work," the lead state investigator remarked, reviewing the meticulously organized evidence. Samuel shrugged slightly. "Sometimes farming requires good record-keeping." Board members began turning on each other as the investigation expanded, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. The county clerk admitted to falsifying documents at Reynolds' direction. 2 agricultural board members confessed to accepting bribes for favorable votes on water rights. The systematic nature of the corruption became impossible to dismiss as isolated incidents. Regional newspapers that had initially ignored Samuel's situation now ran front-page headlines chronicling the scandal. "County corruption ring exposed after failed attack on local farmer," and "Water theft scheme uncovered in drought-stricken county." State media picked up the story, framing it as emblematic of rural power structures that enabled discrimination through economic control. When Samuel entered the local diner the following week, the usual silence didn't descend. Instead, there was a buzz of conversation as people nodded respectfully. Several farmers approached his table to quietly apologize for not speaking up sooner. They shared their own stories of intimidation, forming a more complete picture of how Reynolds had maintained control through targeted pressure on vulnerable community members. An emergency town meeting was called to address the leadership vacuum created by the arrests. The temporary council chair, visibly nervous about the unprecedented situation, managed the overflowing crowd as residents demanded transparency about decisions previously made behind closed doors. Samuel sat quietly in the back, not speaking until specifically asked for his perspective on water management alternatives. When he finally approached the microphone, his practical suggestions focused on solutions rather than accusations. Former antagonists who had once participated in the harassment now publicly acknowledged the systemic corruption that had harmed all small farmers regardless of race. A third-generation farmer named Johnson stood up to describe how his questions about water allocation had resulted in punitive bank audits and mysterious equipment failures until he learned to keep quiet. "We were played against each other," Johnson admitted, his weathered face solemn. "Made to think our problems were caused by outsiders when the real theft was happening right under our noses." A proposal emerged for a new agricultural cooperative that would help local farms compete with corporate agriculture. The co-op would implement transparent water management, shared equipment to reduce individual capital costs, and collective negotiating power with distributors. Samuel's water conservation techniques would become available to all members, potentially saving enough resources to sustain every farm through drought conditions. "Why would you help us after what we did?" asked a farmer who had once participated in the late-night harassment of Samuel's property. "Because this land feeds all of us," Samuel replied simply. "And either we all thrive or we all fail." Wilkins, respected for her family's long history in the county, nominated Samuel for a temporary position on the reorganized Agricultural Board. The nomination was seconded by Johnson, one of his former critics. The vote passed with only 2 dissenting voices. After the meeting, farmers approached Samuel with questions about his irrigation system and soil management techniques. As they gathered around him, the weight of many hands on his shoulders, offering support, seeking connection, asking forgiveness, felt like a more meaningful victory than any legal punishment his opponents might face. Over the subsequent months, positive developments rippled through the county. The State Agricultural Board implemented new transparency regulations requiring public documentation of water usage and allocation decisions. Samuel's conservation system became the county standard, reducing overall consumption by 42% while maintaining productivity. Black and white farmers worked side by side at the new co-op facility, sharing equipment and knowledge that benefited everyone. The artificial divisions that had allowed corruption to flourish began to dissolve as economic cooperation demonstrated the practical benefits of unity. Samuel hosted agricultural students from historically black colleges, establishing an internship program that brought diverse perspectives to farming techniques. The program expanded to include any interested local students, creating pathways to agricultural careers that had previously seemed inaccessible to many. "The land doesn't care about the color of the hands that tend it," Samuel told a farming class gathered in his fields. "It responds to respect, knowledge, and hard work." Samuel's team members each found roles in the community transformation. Rivera established communications systems for the co-op that connected isolated farms to shared resources. Williams helped farmers secure fair loans through transparent banking relationships, identifying predatory terms that had previously trapped many in cycles of debt. Chen implemented security protocols that protected all co-op members from the kind of targeted harassment Samuel had faced. The first community harvest festival held at Heritage Fields brought together families who had previously avoided interaction. Children of all races played among the pumpkin patches and corn mazes, while adults shared food and stories that revealed more commonalities than differences. The sound of their laughter represented a community beginning to heal from long-established divisions. As the festival ended, Samuel received an official letter from the State Agricultural Department requesting his participation in developing a training program for sustainable farming methods. The request specifically cited his innovative approaches to community-based agricultural development, recognition that extended beyond technical farming skills to include his role in transforming social dynamics through economic cooperation. 1 year later, Heritage Fields had expanded to include a training center for sustainable agriculture. The simple metal building housed classrooms, a soil testing lab, and meeting spaces where farmers gathered regularly to share knowledge. Solar panels covered the south-facing roof, powering efficient climate control systems that demonstrated the practical applications of renewable energy in agricultural settings. Samuel moved through the training center with measured steps, his body still substantial but carrying less weight since the stress of constant vigilance had lifted. He remained proudly a big man with a bigger purpose, as he liked to tell the farming students who sometimes commented on his size. Former antagonists had become partners in the successful cooperative, which now included 23 farms sharing resources, knowledge, and market access. Reynolds was serving a 15-year sentence for multiple felonies, while the former county commissioner had been defeated in a special election by a coalition of small farmers committed to transparent governance. The delegation from the Department of Agriculture followed Samuel through demonstration fields where different irrigation systems showed varying efficiency levels. Officials took notes as he explained how specific techniques could be adapted for different soil types and crop varieties. "Your methods have reduced water consumption by 47% across participating farms while increasing yield by 12%, the lead official commented. "That's remarkable efficiency." Samuel nodded. Necessity is a powerful teacher. When you have limited resources, you learn to maximize their impact. Inam, a new farmer who had joined the cooperative the previous month, watched the delegation with curiosity. "You know, They used to say this county would never change, he commented as Samuel rejoined the local farmers after the officials departed. Change is like farming, Samuel replied. You plant the seeds, maintain the soil, and remain patient. Growth always comes. That evening, Samuel announced the establishment of a scholarship for local youth to study agricultural science, funded by profits from the cooperative's premium produce lines. The scholarship prioritized students committed to returning to the community and implementing sustainable practices. Children gathered around Samuel as he knelt in a demonstration garden, showing them how to test soil readiness by feel and smell. Their small hands mimicked his movements, learning through practice rather than just instruction. The rich smell of healthy soil, earthy, alive with beneficial microorganisms, rose around them as they worked. My grandfather farmed this same land, one boy said, but he always complained about the soil getting worse every year. Soil isn't just dirt, Samuel explained. It's a living system that we either nurture or deplete. We're not just growing crops, we're growing the future. His hands, once trembling with anger in the story's beginning, now moved steady and sure as they offered seedlings to a diverse group of new farmers. These hands had once been trained for warfare, but had found their true purpose in nurturing growth and building community. For more powerful true stories of resilience, justice, and transformation, subscribe to Beat Stories. Every week, we bring you real-life accounts that rarely make headlines but change lives. Hit that subscribe button now and tap the notification bell to never miss a story that might just give you the courage to face your own challenges. Remember, the most profound changes often begin with a single person refusing to be broken by the system. Like, share, and become part of our community of everyday heroes, making extraordinary differences.
What happened today isn't just a story, it's a reminder. Silence protects systems, but courage rewrites them. At Beat Stories, we don't just watch change, we document it. Subscribe for more real stories that challenge power and amplify truth.